Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to my channel for another Hot Toys Star Wars 1/6 scale figure unboxing and review. Today we're taking a look at the Shadow Trooper. Now I got mine at a discount from Pop Collectibles. As always, do your own research, make sure you are comfortable before buying. I have popped a link to their site in the description below, along with the discount code Justin's Collection, for 5% off your order if you do decide to buy from them. While you're down there, why not hit that subscribe, bell notification icon, and join button, so you're notified as soon as a brand new Hot Toys Star Wars figure review goes live on the channel. As for the box art, it is done in the typical Hot Toys Star Wars style, except for when it comes to the dimensions of the box. It is a little bit taller than usual, and I think that's because this guy does come with one of those LED light-up Death Star wall panels, so they had to make the box a little bit taller. Up front, we do have an image of the figure himself, with the Death Star wall glowing ominously in the background, in red this time, a metallic foil Star Wars logo, a glossy wraparound banner which does contrast against the satin finish for the rest of the box, featuring another image of him, as well as the interior of what I can only assume is the Death Star, because he literally comes with a Death Star wall panel. Speaking of which, on the side of the box, another image of him with the Death Star wall panel in the background, and I love how the red is casting this red glow on his shiny black armor. Around the back, warnings and legal information. Now you'll have to help me out here. Where in Star Wars canon or legends did we ever actually see red Imperial / Death Star wall panels? I'm sure it was somewhere. Even if they're not accurate to anything, they look bloody awesome. If only Hot Toys sold these frickin' things separately, because I personally would be picking up multiple red Death Star wall panels. Now on the slipcover, we do have an image of the Shadow Trooper, for some reason blasting downwards, even though this is more of a relaxed pose, a bit strange. We have a Star Wars logo, and a red Imperial cog in the background. Now, I'm excited for this guy for multiple reasons. I do actually have the original, but all of the pleather parts on him, they deteriorated pretty quickly after I got him because I picked him up used, and he did come from a country with a very humid climate. So this guy gives me another chance at having a pristine Shadow Trooper. Also, this is the return of the A New Hope Stormtrooper armor mold, and we just don't get to see this look for Stormtroopers very often. First in-hand impressions? So far so good. What we are going to do now though is get all of his accessories laid out in the light box, and take a closer look at everything he comes with. Starting off with part 1 of the display base first. We will check out the Death Star wall backdrop in just a second. So this is the old school style Star Wars base they used to give us with like the A New Hope figures, for example. It's got the metal grate look flooring up on top, and there's some actual depth going on. You can see that there's a panel underneath it, so it genuinely is a convincing effect. I love this. I wish they would use it more often. The crotch grabber is adjustable, and you can put the arm pretty much anywhere, so that's another benefit of this style of base. Around the front, Star Wars and Shadow Trooper on the etched nameplate, and then around the back you have these little slots that you'll use to connect this part of the base up to the diorama backdrop, which ends up looking like this. The base is properly connected to the backdrop, it's very sturdy, it's not going anywhere. I will show you what he looks like standing on this, and you'll get a much clearer look at it, rather than me finagling it on camera, a little bit later on. Now, around the back, we do have a printed cardboard panel, so you could display it this way if you wanted, and a foot which acts as a counterbalance. So if you don't have it connected to the base, it should still remain standing in the collection. You can slide out the cardboard backdrop piece to get access to the battery compartment. It does take 3 AAA batteries, and the light switch. Unfortunately, the cardboard is starting to get chewed up on the corners, even though I am trying to be careful and slot it into these little feet without doing too much damage to it. With the LEDs turned on, this thing looks $1,000,000. If there was a way to have this wired so that it would be powered all the time, I would do it because the ominous red glow, even casting some red light onto the bottom part of the base, looks dope. I treat these as more so part of his outfit rather than accessories. We get these ammo pouches with elastic straps around the back, even though the Hot Toys website does say they're magnetic, they are not. And we also have a thermal detonator with some little clips around the back made of metal. You use them to attach this to his belt. This is a well-established weapon sculpt from Hot Toys. We received the E11 countless times in the past. This might just be one of the best examples of it from them, though. The paint applications are perfect. It's painted in gunmetal, then there's this glossy, almost oil stain wash over the top, and there's some speckling to make it look like there's some texture and as though it could be made of metal. The sculpt we already know is great. There's some texture for the handle, some fake Phillips head screws, and we've got a real metal D-ring around the back. Not to mention you can actually open up the stock, which isn't something that can be said for the Clone Trooper blaster carbines. And lastly, they just don't make them like they used to. Remember when they used to give us pairs of hands for their troopers? We get 2 closed fists. Not 1, not none, but 2. 2 trigger finger hands with the almost rubber glove looking matte finish to the hand part, then the shiny black for the armor plating. Only 1 splayed out finger open palm hand granted, which is in keeping with the old school A New Hope stormtroopers, so I'm not super mad at that. But most importantly, 2 relaxed open palm hands. What we are going to do now, though, is get the Shadow Trooper himself out here. Standing straight up and down in the light box, no crazy poses or accessories or anything like that. I think it's a crime, quite frankly, that we never got to see stormtroopers looking like this in live action. Because it's such a Star Wars trope to take something that's done in one colorway, white for stormtroopers, just flip it, just reverse it, then it's the more specialized, more evil version of that thing. So take R2, flip the colors, then it's an Empire astromech. Take C-3PO, paint him gunmetal, then it's 000. Take a white stormtrooper, paint it gloss black, and then it's a shadow trooper. You can't tell me that that doesn't sound badass, and you can't tell me that this figure doesn't look phenomenal. It's the A New Hope Stormtrooper mold, done in black, and this is going to stand out in the collection for all the right reasons. If you're wondering what this look is based off, some very out there Star Wars media. Comics, Lego Star Wars, action figures, and the first EA Battlefront game. Up close and personal, kicking things off with his helmet. It's been a while since we received a Hot Toys Stormtrooper figure using this helmet mold, and I think I understand why. I think it was for good reason, because it hasn't aged super well. I get it, it's an iconic design. The first time we saw Stormtroopers in live action was in A New Hope, and the first time we got Stormtrooper figures from Hot Toys was based off that movie. Still, the mandibles extend down onto the chest plate, so you pretty much get no articulation forward and back. It flares out really far on either side, so it makes the head look quite big on the body. And the details aren't quite as refined as the Rogue One sculpt, for example, my all-time favorite Hot Toys Stormtrooper mold. It's still good, it's a blast from the past, but don't expect it to be as good as a Rogue One Hot Toys Stormtrooper. So it's essentially a Stormtrooper painted in gloss black with some silver detail work and also some speckling of dirt and grime on the surface. The eyes are this shiny metallic silver, same thing for the little grills and the vent work and the mouth, and they've even gone so far as to add the stripes on the side of the helmet, but in this super subtle matte black paint, so when the light hits it just right, you can see them. Oh, and all of this weathering, the speckling that is pretty much all over him, is a lot more subtle this time. It is heavier in certain places, like around the back here and on his abdomen armor, but compared to the original, it's number one, not the same pattern, so they're not going to look exactly the same on the shelf, and it's not as in your face. It's still there at some added grit and texture and surface detail, but it's not over the top. So he does have the traditional Stormtrooper backplate with the circle and the 2 lines, and the removable thermal detonator. I think in canon that's what that's supposed to be. For now, at least, the Pauldron looks great. It comes across as though it's this almost padded cushion. It's a bit squishy, it's got a rounded edge to it, and it looks like it's being cinched in between the stitched in lines underneath the helmet. The edge is fully finished with this textured fabric, and there's a strap that holds it in place underneath his armpit. You can remove it if you want to. For now, I'm going to keep it on, but eventually I will have to, because pleather is pleather and pleather flakes. It might not be tomorrow, it might not be a year from now, but it might be. One day this is going to look absolutely awful. Speaking of looking awful, what the hell happened to the stitching? I mean, it was in the middle here, then it completely misses, then it goes back sort of to the middle, then it skips again. This is some of the roughest stitching that I have ever seen from Hot Toys. So if you were planning on removing the Pauldron, this is what that looks like. This is the 1.0, the original Shadow Trooper. So I suppose now in my collection I can have a Grunt Shadow Trooper and a Commander. They have made some changes from the original. They've ditched that little fabric shirt thing that was over the top of the undersuit, and I'm glad they did because that thing was so weird, it made no sense to me. His belt is the single most frustrating thing on the entire figure, which is saying something because the looseness of these, quite frustrating. The same thing can be said for the bicep guards, and the gappiness with the shoulder pads, with this hole between them and the body, and them and the chest plate. At least you don't have to worry about it for the right side, because it's hidden by the pauldron. But the belt. Do yourself a favor. Dial in the pose first, then adjust the belt and attach the ammo pouches, and pop the E11 in its holster, and install the thermal detonator canister. Because if you don't, trust me, you are going to have a terrible time posing this guy than having to mess around with the pose just to adjust the frickin' belt. The front part is made of rubbery plastic. There's some more speckling of that almost silver paint on the front of it, whereas around the back, it's made of fabric. And it's got a Velcro closure underneath the thermal detonator. This is tighter on one side where the belt is thicker. On the other, because it's a super thin piece of fabric, it does like to ride high, and that's why it falls off constantly. The holster for the E11 I do think is made of real leather, and we will touch on this in the pros and cons segment. This flap is held in place with a magnet, and when you're installing the E11 in the holster, just make sure you're not catching this piece of leather underneath the trigger guard. It's supposed to go over the top of it. Then the front part of the holster is meant to slot in between the rail and the scope. Okay, let's talk about these ammo pouches. So, being made out of real leather, they have a bit of a sheen to them, so they're quite soft and smooth. And the glossy plastic armor is also very smooth. So, there is no friction. Using elastic to hold them on was a terrible idea, because they just slide off all the time. Once again, that adds to the frustration. I'm probably not going to have him displayed with these on anyway, because when they are installed, they push out the arms and they mess with the proportions. It's all coming back to me now. I'm starting to slowly but surely remember everything that I hate about the New Hope Stormtrooper mold. This figure is beautiful, and if you have your rose-tinted glasses on like I did at the start of the video, you're going to love this guy, no question. But then when you start to pose him, you might get a little bit frustrated having to constantly adjust everything. The shoulder pads, the bicep guards, the forearm armor, the belt, those little pouches. Just take your time with it, take a deep breath, you're going to be perfectly fine. At least the thigh plates are a little bit more stable because there is a ton of padding and it's super thick underneath them. You can see the ledge right there before you get to the base body, and there's the fabric bodysuit on top of that as well. So it cinches everything in and keeps it nice and tight. Down here for the shin guards, we've got an asymmetrical design, and these too like to ride high, exposing the very thin, spindly looking ankle pegs. So just pull those down and cover up those little sticks. The shoes are that old school A New Hope style with the stitched in detail for what would be a black panel on a white shoe for the normal Stormtroopers, but here it's all shiny black, there's some wrinkling sculpted in, but no leather grain. A bit random, I know, but see what I mean? There is so much more surface detail and sculpt detail on the Rogue One Stormtrooper style boots compared to what they were doing back in the day for A New Hope. And there goes the bloody ankle peg again. Underneath the shoes, we do have a little bit of sculpted detail for the tread. And interestingly enough, the original came out in 2014, so these figures are 10 years apart. We're celebrating a decade of Shadow Troopers with this new release. For a quick side-by-side comparison, on the left, the new 2.0 Shadow Trooper with Death Star Wall, can't forget about the Death Star Wall, and on the right, the original. They are identical. If your original still has a viable Pauldron in that it hasn't flaked, then I'm very jealous of you, because mine doesn't. I know I've already mentioned it a few times, I'll try and make sure that's one of the last times. They're the same height, the armor, the same mold between them, and they look great standing together. The glossy black finish matches, but the weathering doesn't. The new one has a lot more subtle weathering, whereas the original has less weathering, but it's more prominent. So it's just going to be down to personal preference, which look you prefer. I cannot get over how good this looks. Glossy black Stormtroopers, turns out they perfectly complement Darth Vader's glossy black helmet. I wish we saw this in live action. We haven't yet, maybe one day. For now, I am going to display both Shadow Troopers alongside not this Vader, which is the Rogue One version, but probably my A New Hope figure. Going over articulation, starting off with his bucket. It is on a double ball peg. However, because the helmet does sit quite low on the neck connector and the mandibles extend down and hang over the front of the chest plate, you don't get a ton of range forward and back. You do get swivel and pivot side to side though. The shoulder pads are free floating, so you can adjust them on the elastic straps they sit on, and they should tuck up underneath the chest armor for a little bit more range. The arms will go up to there, going forward and back, butterfly joint at the shoulder that hinges up and down, swivel at the bicep, ratcheted double bend at the elbow, and do make sure this cutout is facing forward just to maximize range of motion. Then for the wrist peg, it's a hinge and swivel. The torso does crunch forward a bit, going back slightly further, swivel and pivot side to side. The legs go forward to there, but you can rotate the thigh armor and then you'll get more range. Going out to there, swivel at the upper thigh. Double bend at the knee on ratchets, getting you to almost 90. And then for the ankles, a really long stemmed double ball peg. Do make sure to bring the shin guard back down once you're done with posing, just to cover up the gappiness. The feet will go forward and back, swivel, and you do get heaps of ankle tilt. Moving on to the 3 cool and 3 annoying things. The first annoying thing is, while I get why they decided to go with the A New Hope Stormtrooper mold, at the same time, I kind of wish they hadn't. This has a certain retro charm about it that works for the older Stormtrooper figures. But nowadays, having this piece fall off all the time and barely any forward and back range of motion for the head because the A New Hope helmet is so big and it hangs down the front of the chest armor, doesn't work super well for me. This, I reckon, would have been a perfect opportunity to use either the Return of the Jedi or Rogue One Stormtrooper mold. Paint it black and give us a 2.0 Shadow Trooper. Whereas this guy reads more as though he's a reissue than anything else. The second annoying thing is a very minor one. Some people are even going to like the contrast, but I personally would have preferred if the bottom of the display base, this black part, could have matched the gunmetal finish for the Death Star wall. That would have made this look like much more of a cohesive thing, rather than a random Death Star wall slapped on the back of a random display base. The third annoying thing is this Pauldron feels very pleathery. I don't know why they keep using this stuff. They know it doesn't last. It peels, it flakes, and eventually it looks terrible. Oh, and these little silver studs, they fall off all the time as well. Going forward, if you are giving Stormtroopers Pauldron's hot toys, we know you can sculpt them out of plastic. They've done it before, they add the stitching and the leather grain, and they look fantastic. There is no reason to continue using pleather. The first cool thing is I think the holster and these pouches are made of the real McCoy, proper genuine leather. Hot Toys make no mention of it in the announcement post and on Sideshow and on their own website, but it's the smell that's the dead giveaway. As soon as you open the clam tray, it hits you, that genuine leather smell. And they're thicker, you can see the contrasting edges, and the suede-like texture on the inside of the holster. So I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that the holster and these ammo pouches, they're real leather. The second cool thing is if you happen to have multiple of these Death Star wall panels, you can combine them. They actually connect up. How did I not know about this? I've had this one in the collection for years at this point. You can remove these little clip pieces or you can extend them out, just depends on how you want to connect them up. So with the new one, we will flip out the connector. Then you can literally just plug them into one another. And now you have a proper LED, no gap connected Death Star wall backdrop. Now I definitely want the option of being able to pick up more of these things, because in a module case, an entire row of them behind Star Wars figures, that would just look sick. The third cool thing, and I know, I just complained about this mold. I do stick by everything I said. He's hard to work with for posing, the proportions aren't amazing, and this canister does fall off all the time. Modern day Hot Toy Stormtroopers are significantly better than this guy at a mold level. Still, a lot of newer collectors who joined the hobby recently probably have never even seen this mold. And now they've got a chance to have one of these guys in their collection. Plus, it's an exclusive variant that was very hard to find back in the day. This has that really retro nostalgic feel about it that I am all for, so while the mold isn't perfect, I'm still happy to have this guy. Wrapping up on the 2.0 version of the Shadow Trooper. I'm willing to say that this is an actual 2.0 because they have made some changes versus the original. This time we get that absolutely awesome red Death Star wall, and they've tweaked the paint applications for the battle damage so it looks a bit more realistic this time round. Are those things reason enough to warrant picking this guy up if you have the 1.0? No, probably not, unless you're in the same boat as me and the pleather is completely fucked. If that's the case, go ahead and get this guy, you're going to love him. If this is your first time experiencing the A New Hope Stormtrooper mold, you're gonna have to buckle yourself in for a bumpy ride because it's a nightmare to work with. I said it earlier on and I stick by it. You're gonna have to do a ton of futzing, a ton of fiddling to get this guy to look as good as possible. If you are willing to put in that time and effort, it's going to be worth it. This figure will reward you. It's a beautiful looking original trilogy, original Stormtrooper mold in black. So at the end of this, can I recommend him? Yeah, I like the original and I like this guy as well. Flaws and all. Now I got mine at a discount from Pop Collectibles. As always, do your own research, make sure you're comfortable before buying. I have popped a link to their site in the description below, along with the discount code Justin's Collection, for 5% off your order if you do decide to buy from them. While you're down there, why not hit that subscribe, bell notification icon, and join button, if you like the sound of seeing your name in the end credits of my reviews. Like, comment, and subscribe. We'll catch you in the next video.